Look at the state of this creature. She didn't even bother to shower before coming to an interview." Fernanda Caldwell's voice cut through the marble lobby like a guillotine, making 23 heads turn toward the entrance. What they saw made some cover their noses, others whip out their phones. Beatrice Sanders was unrecognizable beneath layers of mud dripping from her hair down to her torn shoes, forming puddles on the floor that cost more than most homes. The Millennium Corporate Tower dominated the skyline of the financial district with its 45 floors of tinted glass and brushed steel. On the 22nd floor, the reception of Nexus Global Enterprises displayed everything money could buy. Bohemian crystal chandeliers hung from the double-height ceiling, scattering golden light over Italian leather armchairs worth $25,000 apiece. Original artworks decorated the walls in a show of power that made it clear only winners walk through those doors. The 23 candidates waiting for the interview looked like they had stepped straight out of a business magazine. Tailor-made suits, shoes polished to mirror shine, French perfumes creating an invisible cloud of exclusivity. Thomas Monroe, 28, adjusted his silk tie for the 5th time while mentally rehearsing answers to possible questions. Julia Vasquez, 31, checked her lip gloss using the reflection on her $80,000 phone. Caroline Rivers, the youngest at 26, reviewed notes on a tablet, the only one who seemed genuinely nervous amid so much manufactured confidence. And then Beatrice entered, or rather staggered in, leaving behind a trail of muddy water that immediately stained the $200,000 Persian rug. At 43, she suddenly looked 60. The simple dress that had left home in impeccable navy blue was now nothing more than a shapeless mass of brown fabric clinging to her body. Her shoes, already patched with glue, made an obscene squelching sound with every step as if they were vomiting water. My God, how disgusting! Julia couldn't hold back, covering her nose with a silk scarf. Security! Somebody call security! Thomas began recording with his phone, whispering for his stories. You won't believe what's happening here. A homeless woman crashed the Nexus Global interview. Fernanda Caldwell rose from the reception desk where she had been reviewing resumes. 35 years of pure arrogance wrapped in a $12,000 red designer suit. Her Louboutins clicked on the marble as she marched toward Beatrice like a general going to execute a deserter. Fernanda hadn't climbed the corporate ladder through competence, but by systematically eliminating anyone she considered a threat. Her secret pleasure was humiliating people she deemed beneath her, and here stood a gift from heaven. Ma'am! Fernanda stopped 2 meters away as though coming any closer might contaminate her. The service entrance is in the back, and the cleaning department isn't even hiring. I came for the interview, Beatrice managed, her voice hoarse from too much crying. My name is on the list, Beatrice Sanders. The silence that followed was broken by a burst of laughter. Fernanda laughed so hard she had to lean against the wall. Interview? You? She turned to the other candidates as though sharing the best joke in the world. Folks, she thinks she's here to interview for a position at Nexus Global looking like that. Laughter erupted in cascades. Thomas nearly dropped his phone from laughing. Julia clapped her hands as if watching a comedy show. Only Caroline stayed quiet, her stomach churning as she saw Beatrice's face twist, fighting back tears. Please, Beatrice took a step forward, more water dripping from her clothes. I can explain. The bus broke down on the freeway. I had to walk 7 miles. Then it started to rain and a car... Her voice faltered. A car drove through a huge puddle and you thought it was appropriate to show up anyway? Fernanda cut her off, gesturing dramatically. Just look at yourself. You reek of sewage. You've contaminated our entire reception area. Do you know how much it costs to sanitize a rug like this? More than she'd make in 10 years, Thomas shouted from the back, drawing more laughter. Beatrice lowered her head. Her tears now mixed with the rain still dripping from her hair. 18 months. 18 months since her world had collapsed. 500 resumes sent. 43 interviews where she was rejected for her age. Eating once a day to save money. Selling everything of value. And now, when she had finally landed an interview at a major company, fate had conspired to humiliate her even more. "I need this job," she whispered, but her voice carried a dignity that even the mud couldn't bury. "Please just give me a chance to—" "A chance?" Fernanda stepped closer, her expensive perfume creating an olfactory barrier against the stench of wet earth. "You want a chance? Look at yourself. You didn't even shower. How can anyone be so careless as to come stinking to an interview?" "I did shower," Beatrice protested, her voice rising for the first time. "I left home at 5 this morning looking perfect. I walked 7 miles in the rain because I didn't have money for another bus. A car splashed mud all over me when I was 2 blocks away. I tried." The outburst echoed across the lobby. For a moment, only the sound of rain pelting the windows broke the silence. Then Fernanda smiled. That cruel smile of someone about to deliver the killing blow. "You know what? I'll give you a chance." She turned to the other candidates. "How about a little show before the interviews?" She turned back to Beatrice. "You have 2 minutes to convince me you deserve to be here. 2 minutes to impress me so much that I'll ignore the fact that you ruined our reception." "Can you do that?" "Fernanda, this is humiliation," Caroline finally spoke, standing up. "She clearly went through something terrible just to get here." "If you want to defend the homeless woman, you can leave with her," Fernanda snapped. Caroline sat back down but kept her look of disapproval. Beatrice looked around. 23 pairs of eyes fixed on her, some with pity, most with scorn, all waiting for the circus to continue. Phones raised, recording her humiliation for digital posterity. Fernanda stood with crossed arms, savoring every second of power. It was now or never. 2 minutes to save not just her day, but maybe her life. Because with eviction scheduled for next week and her fridge empty for the past 3 days, this $500 a month job was her last hope before becoming just another statistic of America's homeless crisis. "I accept," Beatrice said, wiping mud from her face with the back of her hand. 2 minutes. Fernanda glanced at her diamond-studded watch and smiled with cruel satisfaction. "The clock starts now. 2 minutes. Impress me, janitor." The title was spat out like venom, making sure to remind everyone exactly where she thought Beatrice belonged. Beatrice took a deep breath, feeling the weight of mud in her clothes, the chill of water in her ruined shoes, but above all the burden of 18 months of rejection that had led her to this moment. She straightened her back, ignoring the muffled laughter still coming from some candidates, and began to speak in a voice that surprised everyone with its clarity. "You want me to impress you, Fernanda? Then I'll start by answering your initial question about corporate crisis management that was on the pre-selection form." The HR director frowned. That was a highly technical question she used to weed out applicants. How could this mud-soaked woman even know about it? But before she could interrupt, Beatrice continued, now in flawless English with an accent that betrayed years of international practice. "The crisis management framework that Nexus Global currently uses is outdated by at least 7 years. Your dependency on the Morrison model leaves you vulnerable to supply chain disruptions, particularly in the Southeast Asian markets where you've been trying to expand. The silence that filled the room was different this time. Thomas lowered his phone, forgetting to record. Julia closed her mouth, which had been hanging open. Caroline leaned forward, fascinated. Beatrice switched fluidly into Mandarin, her impeccable pronunciation making Fernanda pale. She was citing internal company reports that weren't public, analyzing flaws in the logistics system that only top executives would know. I studied every Nexus annual report from the past 10 years. Beatrice returned to Portuguese, wiping more mud from her face as she spoke. You lost the contract with the Shimura Corporation in Japan because you failed to grasp the concept of omotenashi in Japanese business culture. You lost $45 million because you didn't have someone who truly understood cultural nuances. She switched to fluent Japanese, explaining exactly where the company had failed, then to German, detailing mistakes in the European expansion, and finally to French, analyzing missed opportunities in the Francophone African market. "How do you know all this?" Fernanda managed, her voice weak. All arrogance evaporated like water on hot asphalt. The other candidates were in absolute shock. Who was this mud-covered woman who spoke 5 languages fluently and knew corporate secrets even insiders didn't? Beatrice paused, and for the first time since she had walked in, something beyond desperation appeared in her eyes. It was pain, deep, raw pain. Because 3 years ago I was Beatrice Sanders, Executive Director of Nexus Consulting International. I was the one who wrote the original report recommending Nexus Global's entry into the Asian market. I was the one who designed the strategy you have implemented and then abandoned when you thought you knew better. The revelation hit like a bomb. Several candidates grabbed their phones not to film, but to Google her name. And there it was, Beatrice Sanders. A legend in the corporate world, known for rescuing companies on the brink of bankruptcy, fluent in 7 languages, having lived 3 years in China building trade bridges that still sustained half of America's exports to Asia. "This can't be," Thomas muttered, reading his screen. She was on the cover of Fortune 5 times. She was ranked among the 100 most influential executives in Latin America. He looked at the mud-soaked woman before him, unable to reconcile the image. "What happened?" Caroline asked gently, the only one to show genuine empathy. "How did you go from executive director to—" She gestured, unable to finish the sentence. Beatrice closed her eyes for a moment, the memory still too painful. "My husband Robert got COVID in March 2020. He spent 93 days in the ICU. I sold everything to pay for his treatment once the insurance coverage maxed out. Our family business, which we built together over 15 years, didn't survive the lockdown. When he died in June, I owed $800,000 in medical bills. I lost the house, the car, the savings, the business, everything. And I discovered that at 43, even with all my experience, no one wanted to hire a woman drowning in debt and grief." The clock on the wall showed 30 seconds left of the 2 minutes. Beatrice made use of every second. But I kept studying. I downloaded reports using public Wi-Fi at coffee shops. I read about you, about every major company in New York, because I knew that one day I'd get a chance, even if it was just for a $2,500 junior assistant job. And today, after walking 7 miles in the rain, after a car splashed mud all over me just a block away, I still came. because I need this job, but more importantly, because I know I can add value, even if it's cleaning bathrooms, if that's what you offer me." She looked directly at Fernanda, who had backed several steps away and was now pale as paper. "I know, for example, that you have a critical compliance issue that's going to blow up in about 3 months when the international audit arrives. I know, because I recognize the signs. It's the same mistake that Harper and Associates made before losing $400 million in fines. I could fix it in 2 weeks, but I won't beg. I've humiliated myself enough for today." Fernanda's phone timer beeped. 2 minutes had passed, but no one moved. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rain beating against the windows and the occasional drip of water from Beatrice's clothes onto the carpet worth more than most people made in a year. That's when a deep, controlled male voice cut through the silence from the back of the room. "Interesting. Very interesting." Everyone turned to see a 52-year-old man with perfectly groomed gray hair, wearing a suit easily worth $50,000, emerging from behind a partition where he had apparently been watching everything for at least 10 minutes. Anthony Ferraro, CEO of Nexus Global, the man who had turned a family-owned company into a $2 billion multinational, was there. And the look in his eyes as he studied Beatrice wasn't pity or mockery. It was recognition. Anthony Ferraro walked slowly across the lobby, each step measured, his Italian shoes creating a hypnotic rhythm on the marble. He stopped 3 meters from Beatrice, studying her with eyes that had seen enough rises and falls to recognize true talent regardless of its packaging. "Beatrice Sanders," he said, savoring the name like someone tasting a rare wine. "The woman who saved Meridian Technologies from bankruptcy in 2018. The executive who achieved the impossible, making Chinese, Japanese, and American companies work together on the Digital Port project. The legend who disappeared from the market 3 years ago without a trace." Fernanda stepped forward, trying to regain some control over the situation that had completely slipped from her hands. "Mr. Ferraro, I didn't know you would be here today. I was just maintaining the company's standards by—" "Oh?" But her sentence died when Anthony raised his hand, a simple gesture that silenced her instantly. "I was here, Fernanda, because I received troubling complaints about the HR department. Complaints about the systematic humiliation of candidates, about discrimination based on age, appearance, and social class. I came to see with my own eyes if they were true." He turned to the 23 candidates watching everything like statues of salt. "And I discovered they were worse than I imagined. Much worse." Beatrice stayed where she was, water still dripping from her clothes, but something in her posture had changed. She was no longer the desperate woman begging for a chance. She was the executive who had once led billion-dollar negotiations, only temporarily disguised beneath layers of mud and misfortune. Anthony recognized that transformation because he himself had gone through something similar 30 years earlier when he lost everything and had to rebuild from scratch. "Mrs. Sanders," Anthony said, and the formal title made several candidates gasp. "Allow me to tell everyone here a story. 5 years ago, my first company, Ferraro Innovations, was on the verge of collapse. I had invested everything in an expansion to Asia that went wrong. I owed $150 million, 3 days away from declaring bankruptcy. That's when a friend introduced me to a consultant who, he said, performed miracles. That consultant was you." Beatrice lowered her eyes, memories from that time returning. It had been one of the most complex cases of her career, requiring not just financial restructuring but delicate cultural navigation among investors from 7 different countries. It was just work, Mr. Ferraro. I did what needed to be done. Just work? Anthony laughed, but it wasn't a cruel laugh like the others had been. You worked 20 hours a day for 3 months. You learned advanced Mandarin in 6 weeks to negotiate directly with Shanghai investors. You flew to Tokyo 4 times at your own expense because my company couldn't afford it. And when we finally closed the deal that saved everything, you refused half of your fee because you said I would need the capital to rebuild. He paused, letting the words sink into everyone's consciousness. That deal didn't just save my company, it laid the foundation for Nexus Global. All of this, he gestured to the luxurious office around them, exists because you didn't give up when everyone else said it was impossible. Thomas Monroe had stopped recording completely, his phone forgotten in his hand as he processed what he was hearing. Julia Vasquez had tears in her eyes, her expensive makeup beginning to run. Caroline Rivers smiled openly, the only one who seemed genuinely happy about the turn of events. But Fernanda was the one offering the most dramatic spectacle. She had backed up against the wall, her face shifting between red with rage and white with terror as she realized the magnitude of the mistake she had made. Now, Anthony continued, his voice gaining a hardness that made everyone shrink, let's talk about what I witnessed here today. I saw a highly qualified professional who had gone through a devastating personal tragedy make a heroic effort to show up for an interview. Walk 7 miles in the rain, be splashed with mud, and still come because she had commitment and need. And how was she received? He turned slowly, his eyes scanning every person in the room. With laughter, with filming for social media entertainment, with public humiliation orchestrated by someone who should represent this company's values. Fernanda Caldwell, you not only failed as an HR professional, you failed as a human being. Mr. Ferraro, I can explain. Fernanda tried, desperation clear in her voice. The company standards, the image we need to maintain, standards. Anthony cut her off. What kind of standards value appearance over competence, that allow someone vulnerable to be humiliated for entertainment? Do you know how many companies lose exceptional talent because of this kind of prejudice? He pulled out his phone and showed the screen. I just received the videos Mr. Monroe over there was recording. They've already been shared 200 times in 15 minutes. The title? Billion-dollar company humiliates candidate who lost everything in the pandemic. Congratulations, Fernanda. In 10 minutes, you managed to destroy a reputation that took me 20 years to build. The silence that followed was suffocating. Thomas tried frantically to delete the videos from his phone, but it was too late. The internet never forgets, and the story was already spreading like wildfire. Julia had sunk into her armchair, wishing she could disappear. Only Caroline remained upright, still processing everything that was happening. Anthony turned back to Beatrice, his voice softening considerably. Mrs. Sanders, I know you've been through hell these last 3 years. I know about losing Robert, about the medical debts, about every rejected resume. Yes, I knew you had applied for the position. Your name popped up in the system 2 weeks ago, and I couldn't believe Beatrice Sanders was applying for a $2,500 junior assistant job. Beatrice finally lifted her eyes, and there was an unspoken question in them. Anthony answered before she could ask. I didn't step in earlier because I needed to see if you were still the fighter I met 5 years ago. I needed to be sure the tragedy hadn't broken your spirit. And today, seeing you here, covered in mud but holding on to your dignity, demonstrating knowledge many of my executives don't possess, speaking 5 languages fluently even after 18 months of rejection. Today, I am certain." He turned to Fernanda one last time. "You're fired. Right now. Security will escort you to collect your things, and you can be sure that every reputable company in this city will know exactly what kind of professional you are. As for you, Thomas Monroe and Julia Vasquez, you can leave too. We don't hire people who think humiliation is entertainment." He paused, his eyes finding Caroline. "Miss Rivers, you were the only one who showed humanity. You may stay for the interview if you still want to." Caroline nodded, still in shock at everything she had witnessed. Fernanda tried to protest, but 2 security guards had already arrived to escort her out, her high heels clicking a pathetic staccato of defeat on the marble. Thomas and Julia left in silence, the former likely calculating how many millions he had just lost by filming what he shouldn't have, the latter finally realizing that expensive makeup doesn't cover a bad character. When the lobby was emptier, Anthony approached Beatrice, taking off his $50,000 jacket and offering it to her, shivering with cold. "Beatrice, I'm not going to offer you the junior assistant job." Her heart sank for a moment, until he continued. "I'm going to offer you the position of Vice President of Digital Transformation and International Expansion. Starting salary of $85,000 a month with performance bonuses that can double that amount. Company car, full health coverage, stock options, and a $300,000 advance so you can take care of your immediate needs." Beatrice staggered, and Anthony quickly held her arm. Tears now streamed freely down her face, carving paths through the dried mud. "Mr. Ferraro, I don't have proper clothes. I don't have a decent place to live. I am—" She gestured at herself, at the wreck she appeared to be. "You are exactly where you should be," he replied firmly. "Do you know what I see when I look at you right now? I see someone who walked 7 miles in the rain for an opportunity. I see someone who, even at rock bottom, kept studying, learning, preparing. I see the executive who saved my company, temporarily covered in mud but still shining within. Mud comes off with soap and water in minutes. The character you demonstrated today, that's eternal." 6 months had passed since that rainy morning that changed everything. The 22nd floor of Nexus Global Enterprises had a different energy now, more human, less mechanical. Beatrice Sanders walked the hallways with firm steps, wearing an elegant but understated navy blue suit, greeting employees by name, stopping to hear their suggestions. The woman once covered in mud was gone, but the lesson from that day was engraved in every decision she made. In her office, ironically the same one Fernanda Caldwell had once occupied with such arrogance, Beatrice reviewed the quarter's numbers with quiet satisfaction. Since she had implemented the Talent Without Prejudice program, 340 hires had been made based solely on competence, ignoring age, appearance, or social class. The result? The company's revenue had grown 45%, the highest increase in a decade. But the number she was most proud of was another: 0% turnover among the new hires. People given real chances repaid it with fierce loyalty. The door opened after a soft knock, and Caroline Rivers entered carrying tablets and reports. She had been hired on that fateful day and quickly proved herself an exceptional professional, becoming Beatrice's executive assistant in just 3 months. "Beatrice, there's someone here insisting on speaking with you. They said it's about a position in the reemployment program." Beatrice looked through the glass wall and her heart skipped a beat. Fernanda Caldwell was sitting at reception, but she seemed to have aged 10 years in 6 months. The red power suit had been replaced by a simple department store outfit. The once perfectly blown-out hair showed gray roots, and the arrogant gaze had given way to something Beatrice recognized instantly: desperation. The same expression she herself had worn for 18 months. "Send her in," Beatrice said after a moment of reflection. Caroline hesitated, clearly surprised, but obeyed. When Fernanda entered the office, the contrast with her previous behavior was shocking. She kept her head down, her hands trembling slightly as she held a battered folder of documents. "Beatrice, Miss Sanders," Fernanda began, her voice breaking. "I know I'm the last person you want to see. I know I don't even deserve to be in this building after what I did, but I'm desperate." She paused, swallowing the pride that had once been her trademark. "No one will hire me. My name has become synonymous with terrible people management. I've been unemployed for 6 months. The savings are gone. I'm going to lose my apartment next month. My kids are eating only twice a day." Beatrice stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city below. How many Fernandas and Beatrices existed in that sea of concrete, alternating between tormentor and victim as circumstances shifted? "You have children?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. She had looked into Fernanda after the incident and discovered that behind the cruel executive was a single mother of 8-year-old twins. 2, Peter and Paula, 8. Fernanda's voice was so low it was barely audible. "They don't understand why we had to leave the private school, why we can't order pizza on Fridays anymore, why Mom cries in the bathroom where they can't see." Tears began to fall, and she didn't even try to wipe them away. "I was horrible to you, Beatrice. Unforgivable. But my children don't deserve to pay for my mistakes." Beatrice turned and studied the broken woman before her. It would be so easy to send her away, to let Fernanda endure a few more months of the hell Beatrice herself had lived through. It would be fair. It would even be expected. But Beatrice had learned something fundamental during those 18 months of trial. Cruelty breeds more cruelty, but compassion has the power to break the cycle. "The reemployment program has an opening in the administrative department," Beatrice said, returning to her seat. "Starting salary of $4,000, meal stipend, basic health plan, but there are conditions." Fernanda lifted her head, eyes wide with surprise. She had expected humiliation, revenge, anything but a second chance. "First, you'll undergo a psychological assessment and follow-up to understand and address your previous behavior. Second, part of your job will be giving talks about the dangers of hiring bias, using your own story as an example. Third, you'll report directly to Caroline Rivers." Beatrice gestured toward the young woman who watched it all, open-mouthed. "The same person you threatened to fire for showing empathy. Can you swallow that pride?" Fernanda nodded frantically, tears now flowing freely. Yes, anything." "Beatrice, I don't have words to thank you. After what I did, after what you did, you learned the hardest lesson there is," Beatrice cut in. "You discovered that the ground beneath our feet can vanish at any moment. That arrogance is a luxury no one can truly afford. Now use that lesson. Be the mother your children deserve, and be for others the professional you should have been from the start." As Fernanda left the office, still processing the reversal in her fortune, Caroline approached Beatrice. "Why did you do that? After everything she put you through?" Beatrice smiled, a small but genuine smile. Because someone gave me a second chance when I needed it most. Anthony could have left me in the mud, literally. But he saw beyond the moment. He saw potential where others saw only wreckage. If I don't pay that forward, what kind of person would I be? The intercom buzzed, and the receptionist's voice echoed, "Ms. Sanders, Mr. Ferraro is here for the 3 o'clock meeting." Anthony entered with his usual composed bearing, but there was a glint of satisfaction in his eyes as he took in the office now under Beatrice's command. "The quarterly numbers are extraordinary," he said, setting a tablet on the desk. "But what impresses me most are the testimonials. Employees saying that for the first time they feel the company cares about them as people, not just numbers. Clients commenting on the shift in corporate culture. Even the media, which used to love taking shots at us, now uses Nexus as an example of positive business transformation." "It was a collective effort," Beatrice replied modestly. "I only gave people the chance to show their real worth." Anthony stood and walked to the window, the same place where Beatrice had been minutes earlier. "Do you know what struck me most that day? It wasn't your competence, your languages, your technical knowledge. It was when you said you'd work cleaning bathrooms if necessary. That humility, that willingness to start over from scratch, that's rare, which is why I want to make you an offer." He turned, and there was something different in his expression. "I'm planning my succession. In 2 years, I intend to step down as CEO and remain only on the board. I want you to be my successor, the president of Nexus Global Enterprises. The board has already approved it, provided you agree to a preparation program that starts next month." The silence that followed was profound. Caroline had stopped breathing. Beatrice felt the world spin for a moment. From rejected janitorial candidate to president of a $2 billion company in less than 3 years. It was the kind of twist that sounded like a movie, except every step had been earned with sweat, tears, and a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. "Mr. Ferraro, Anthony," she said, her voice thick. "I would scrub bathrooms forever if it meant never going through what I went through again. But to lead your company? It's exactly what you deserve," he interrupted. "Not out of pity, not out of gratitude, but out of pure competence. You increased our revenue by 45% in 6 months. You fixed the compliance issue that could have cost us millions. You built a corporate culture now being studied in universities. You're not being promoted, Beatrice. You're simply taking the place that has always been yours by right." That afternoon, as the sun began to set over New York, painting the skyscrapers gold, Beatrice stood once more in the reception area where it had all begun. The Persian rug had been replaced by a more practical, non-slip floor. The $15,000 armchairs had given way to comfortable but accessible seating. And on the wall, where once hung pricey artworks nobody truly appreciated, there was now a simple but powerful plaque. "Here we judge competence, not appearance. Here we value character, not social class. Here everyone deserves respect and a second chance." Beneath the plaque, a framed photo showed Beatrice on the day of that fateful interview, covered in mud yet standing, dignified, unbreakable. Beside it, a quote that had become the mantra of the new Nexus Global. "The mud washed off in minutes, but the impact will last for generations." And so, the woman who was humiliated for being too dirty for an interview became the leader who cleaned up an entire corporate culture. The executive who lost everything discovered that sometimes you have to fall in the mud to learn how to help others stand up. And the company that nearly lost a diamond by judging it for the mud that covered it learned that the greatest treasures often come in the most unexpected packages. Beatrice Sanders' story became a case study in business schools, an inspiration to thousands of professionals facing their own storms, and definitive proof that no matter how much mud life throws at you, what matters is the strength to keep walking, the courage to step through the door even when everyone laughs, and the dignity to turn humiliation into humanity. Because in the end, it wasn't the mud that defined Beatrice. It was what she did after washing it away that changed the world around her.